The afternoon sun blazed through the grimy windows of Murphy's saloon as 16-year-old Caleb Stone pushed through the batwing doors, his worn boots tracking stable dirt across the warped wooden floor. The familiar stench of manure and hay clung to his patched clothes, despite his attempts to clean up before entering the establishment. Every head in the saloon turned toward him, and the low murmur of conversation gradually died into hostile silence. Caleb had worked at Henderson's livery stable for 3 years, ever since his mother died of consumption and left him with nothing but the clothes on his back and a fierce determination to survive. The job paid barely enough to keep him fed and housed in the tiny room above the stable, but it was honest work, and old Jacob Henderson had treated him with more kindness than most people in Copper Creek ever showed. Today, however, Caleb wasn't here for his usual quick beer after a long day of mucking stalls and tending horses. He had come with a purpose that had taken every ounce of courage he possessed: to ask Mayor Theodore Blackstone for 5 minutes of his time to discuss a business proposition. The mayor sat at his usual table in the back corner of the saloon, surrounded by the town's most prominent citizens: Judge Harrison Whitmore, Banker Samuel Morrison, and cattle baron William Ashford. These men controlled every aspect of life in Copper Creek, from who got loans to who got justice in the courtroom. They were discussing something in low voices when Caleb's entrance interrupted their conversation. "Well, well," Mayor Blackstone said with a condescending smile that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. "Look what the cat dragged in. Stable boy, I believe you're tracking horse shit all over Murphy's clean floor." The saloon erupted in cruel laughter at the mayor's words. Caleb felt his face burn with humiliation, but he forced himself to stand straight and maintain what dignity he could. He had prepared for this moment, knowing that these men would try to intimidate him before he even had a chance to speak. "Mayor Blackstone," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands, "I was hoping I could have a word with you about a business matter." The laughter grew louder at the idea of the stable boy having business to discuss with the mayor. Judge Whitmore leaned back in his chair and regarded Caleb with obvious amusement. "Business matter? Boy, the only business you should concern yourself with is making sure my horse is properly fed and watered when I leave him at the stable." Banker Morrison took a long drink of his whiskey and smirked. "Maybe the boy wants to take out a loan, Blackstone. Though I can't imagine what collateral a stable hand might offer. His aromatic presence, perhaps," added cattle baron Ashford, triggering another wave of laughter from the assembled crowd. Caleb waited for the mockery to subside before continuing. "Sir, I've been saving money for 3 years, and I have a proposal about the abandoned lot next to Henderson's livery. I'd like to purchase it and expand the stable business." The suggestion was met with stunned silence, followed by the loudest laughter yet. Mayor Blackstone wiped tears from his eyes as he struggled to contain his amusement. "Purchase property? Son, do you have any idea how much that lot is worth?" "I've saved $47, Caleb replied with quiet dignity. "I know it's not much, but I was hoping we might work out some kind of payment plan." The mayor's expression shifted from amusement to something resembling pity, though the cruelty never left his eyes. $47. Well, property worth at least $500. Boy, you might be able to buy yourself a decent pair of boots with that money, but real estate is far beyond your reach. Judge Whitmore leaned forward with interest. "Tell me, stable boy, what makes you think you're qualified to run an expanded business?" "You can barely read and write from what I hear." "I can read and write just fine, Your Honor," Caleb replied firmly. "And I know more about horses and livestock than most men in this town. Mr. Henderson has taught me everything about running a stable, from accounting to animal care." Banker Morrison laughed harshly. "Henderson's a drunk who's one bad month away from losing his business entirely. Learning from him is like learning navigation from a man who's perpetually lost." The insult to Jacob Henderson, the one person in town who had shown Caleb genuine kindness, sparked a flash of anger that the boy couldn't quite suppress. "Mr. Henderson is a good man who's forgotten more about horses than most people ever learn. He built his business from nothing through hard work and honesty. And where has that honesty gotten him? Mayor Blackstone asked mockingly, living in a rundown stable with a charity case for an employee. Real success requires more than just hard work, boy. It requires breeding, education, and connections that someone like you will never possess. Cattle Baron Ashford nodded sagely. The mayor's right, son. Men like us were born to lead and prosper. Men like you were born to serve. There's no shame in knowing your place and staying in it. The words hit Caleb like physical blows, but he refused to let these men see how deeply their cruelty affected him. I believe a man's worth should be measured by his character and his work, not by who his parents were or how much money he inherited. How noble, Judge Whitmore said with exaggerated admiration. Unfortunately, nobility doesn't pay rent or buy property. The world runs on money and power, not good intentions. Mayor Blackstone stood up from his table and approached Caleb with the confident swagger of a man accustomed to intimidating those beneath his station. Son, I'm going to give you some free advice that's worth more than your $47. Stop dreaming about things you'll never achieve and focus on being grateful for what you have. Henderson's given you steady work and a roof over your head. That's more than most orphans can expect. The mayor's voice took on a harder edge as he continued. But if I hear about you bothering respectable businessmen with ridiculous propositions again, I'll make sure Henderson knows that keeping you employed might not be in his best interests. Do I make myself clear? Caleb felt the threat like a cold wind, knowing that Mayor Blackstone had enough influence to destroy his life with a few well-placed words. But despite the fear, something inside him refused to be completely broken by these men's cruelty. I understand, sir, Caleb replied quietly, but I still believe that hard work and determination can overcome circumstances of birth. Banker Morrison laughed. You just don't learn, do you, boy? Some people are destined for greatness, and others are destined to shovel horse shit. Guess which category you fall into? As Caleb turned to leave the saloon, enduring more laughter and crude comments about his appearance and prospects, he caught sight of a familiar figure sitting alone at the bar. Sheriff William Crawford was nursing a whiskey and watching the proceedings with an expression that Caleb couldn't quite read. Their eyes met for a moment, and the sheriff gave an almost imperceptible nod before returning his attention to his drink. Sheriff Crawford was an enigma in Copper Creek, a man who seemed to maintain his integrity despite the corruption that surrounded the town's leadership. He rarely spoke unless necessary, but when he did, his words carried weight. Caleb had always sensed that the sheriff viewed him with something approaching respect, though they had never had occasion to speak at length. As Caleb pushed through the batwing doors and stepped back into the harsh sunlight, he could still hear the mocking laughter echoing from inside the saloon. The humiliation burned in his chest like acid, but underneath the pain was a growing determination to prove these men wrong. No matter how long it took or what sacrifices were required, he walked slowly back toward Henderson's livery, his saved $47 feeling like a joke in his pocket. The dream of expanding the stable business seemed impossibly naive now, crushed beneath the weight of the town's social hierarchy and his own powerlessness. But as Caleb reached the stable and began his evening chores, he made a silent promise to himself. Someday, somehow, he would show the men of Copper Creek that they had underestimated the stable boy. He didn't know how it would happen or when, but he believed with fierce certainty that his story was far from over. The horses nickered softly as he worked, and Caleb found comfort in their unconditional acceptance of his presence. Unlike the humans in town, the animals judged him only by how well he cared for them, and by that measure he had never failed. The autumn wind carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves through the streets of Copper Creek as Sheriff William Crawford made his way toward the law office of Jeremiah Thornton, the town's only attorney. Clutched in his weathered hand was a sealed envelope that had arrived on the morning stage from Denver, bearing official stamps and the kind of formal language that usually meant someone's life was about to change dramatically. Sheriff Crawford had been expecting this correspondence for several weeks, ever since he received word that old Marcus Whitfield had finally succumbed to the pneumonia that had been slowly killing him in a Denver hospital. Whitfield had been one of the territory's most successful cattle ranchers and mine owners, a man whose business interests had made him wealthy enough to influence politics from Colorado to California. What most people in Copper Creek didn't know was that Marcus Whitfield had spent the last 3 months of his life working with Denver attorneys to draft a very unusual will, one that would shock the town's established social order and vindicate some long-held beliefs about justice and human worth. The sheriff pushed through the door of Thornton's office to find the lawyer already preparing for the reading, his normally nervous demeanor replaced by obvious excitement about the drama that was about to unfold. Word had spread quickly through town that Whitfield's will would be read publicly, and the office was packed with curious citizens eager to learn how the old man's fortune would be distributed. Mayor Theodore Blackstone occupied the chair closest to Thornton's desk, his expensive suit and confident posture reflecting his assumption that he would play a prominent role in whatever announcements were forthcoming. Judge Harrison Whitmore sat beside him, while banker Samuel Morrison and cattle baron William Ashford claimed the remaining chairs of honor. The rest of the available space was filled with townspeople of various social standings, all whispering among themselves about the possible contents of Whitfield's will. Near the back of the room, almost unnoticed among the crowd, stood Caleb Stone, still wearing his work clothes and smelling faintly of the stable. "Gentlemen, ladies," Attorney Thornton began, his voice carrying unusual authority for such a typically timid man. "We are gathered here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Marcus James Whitfield, deceased, as witnessed and sealed in Denver, Colorado territory." Mayor Blackstone leaned forward with obvious anticipation. "Get on with it, Thornton. Some of us have important business to attend to." Thornton adjusted his spectacles and opened the sealed envelope with theatrical precision. The will begins with several standard bequests to various charities and distant relatives, totaling approximately $10,000. A murmur of interest rippled through the crowd. $10,000 was more money than most of them would see in a lifetime, but they all knew that Whitfield's estate was worth far more than that amount. However, Thornton continued, his voice rising with dramatic emphasis, the bulk of Mr. Whitfield's estate, including his ranch properties, mining interests and business holdings, has been left to a single individual. The room fell silent as everyone waited to learn who would become one of the wealthiest people in the territory. Mayor Blackstone's smile suggested he had already concluded that his political connections had earned him Whitfield's favor. Thornton cleared his throat and read from the document. "To Caleb Stone of Copper Creek, Colorado Territory, I leave the remainder of my earthly possessions, including but not limited to the Circle W Ranch, the Silver Dollar Mine, my business interests in Denver and San Francisco, and all associated properties and assets." The silence that followed was so complete that the ticking of Thornton's wall clock seemed as loud as gunshots. Every person in the room turned to stare at the stable boy standing near the back wall, their expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to outright anger. Caleb himself seemed frozen in place, his face pale as parchment as he struggled to process what he had just heard. The boy who had been mocked for saving $47 had just inherited a fortune worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Mayor Blackstone was the first to recover his voice. "That's impossible. There must be some mistake. Why would Marcus Whitfield leave his fortune to a stable boy?" Attorney Thornton consulted the will again before responding. Mr. Whitfield included a detailed explanation of his decision, which I am obligated to read in its entirety. The lawyer's voice took on the cadence of formal legal language as he continued. "I, Marcus Whitfield, being of sound mind and body, choose to leave my estate to Caleb Stone for the following reasons. First, because I have observed his character through reports from trusted associates and find him to possess the integrity and work ethic that are sadly lacking in many men of supposed higher station. Judge Whitmore interrupted angrily. What associates? Who has been reporting on a stable boy's character? Sheriff Crawford stepped forward slightly, and several people in the room suddenly understood the connection. The sheriff had been quietly observing and reporting on Caleb's behavior for months, documenting instances of honesty, kindness, and determination that had impressed the dying rancher. Thornton continued reading. Second, because young Mr. Stone has demonstrated the kind of respect for animals and understanding of ranch operations that will serve him well in managing my livestock and agricultural interests. Third, because I believe that true worth comes from character rather than circumstances of birth, and I choose to put my money behind that belief. The explanation hit the room's assembled dignitaries like a series of slaps in the face. Marcus Whitfield had essentially declared that the stable boy possessed more merit than all of Copper Creek's established leaders combined. Banker Morrison jumped to his feet, his face flushed with rage. This is preposterous. A 16-year-old boy can't possibly manage business interests of this magnitude. The will should be contested on grounds of mental incompetence. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Thornton replied calmly. Mr. Whitfield anticipated such objections and had his mental competency thoroughly documented by 3 separate physicians in Denver. Their signed statements are part of the legal record. Cattle Baron Ashford's voice shook with indignation. Even if the will is legal, the boy lacks the education and experience to manage such wealth responsibly. He'll lose everything within a year. Perhaps, Thornton acknowledged, which is why Mr. Whitfield also established a trust fund managed by Denver attorneys to provide guidance and oversight until Mr. Stone reaches the age of 25. However, all major decisions remain his to make. Caleb finally found his voice, though it came out as little more than a whisper. Why me? I never even met Mr. Whitfield. Sheriff Crawford spoke for the first time since entering the office. Marcus Whitfield believed in judging men by their actions rather than their reputations, son. He'd been watching this town for years, looking for someone who deserved a chance to prove themselves. The sheriff's words carried weight that silenced the room's growing protests. Everyone knew that Crawford was a man of few words and unshakable. Integrity and his support of Whitfield's decision lent credibility to what otherwise seemed like an impossible fairy tale. Mayor Blackstone made one final attempt to challenge the will. Even if this document is legally valid, I question whether it serves the public interest to place so much wealth and power in the hands of someone so young and inexperienced. Attorney Thornton smiled for the first time since the reading began. Mr. Whitfield addressed that concern as well. He wrote, I have observed that the young man in question has already demonstrated more wisdom and integrity than most of the so-called leaders of Copper Creek, despite lacking their advantages of birth and education. If inexperience is truly a disqualifying factor, then perhaps the town's current leadership should also be questioned. The final insult left the room's dignitaries speechless with fury, while the ordinary citizens began to murmur with excitement and approval. Many of them had witnessed Caleb's treatment at the hands of the town's elite, and Whitfield's posthumous vindication of the stable boy felt like justice finally being served. As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with shock and speculation, Caleb remained frozen in place, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just occurred. His life had changed completely in the space of 15 minutes, transforming him from the town's most mocked resident to one of its wealthiest and most powerful citizens. The stable boy is now one of the richest men in the territory. But how will the town's elite react to this stunning reversal of fortune? Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to see the incredible conclusion of this story. The golden light of dawn, filtered through the windows of what had once been Marcus Whitfield's private office in the Copper Creek First Bank building, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk where Caleb Stone now sat, reviewing financial documents that represented more wealth than he had ever imagined possible. 3 months had passed since the reading of Whitfield's will, and the transformation of the former stable boy into one of the territory's most powerful men had created ripples that continued to reshape the entire community. Caleb had spent those months learning to navigate the complex world of business and finance with the help of attorneys and accountants. Sent from Denver to manage the transition, his natural intelligence, combined with the work ethic that had impressed Marcus Whitfield, proved more than adequate for understanding the intricacies of ranch management, mining operations, and investment portfolios. More importantly, Caleb had used his newfound wealth and influence to begin addressing some of the injustices he had observed during his years as an invisible member of Copper Creek society. His first act as owner of the Silver Dollar Mine had been to improve working conditions and increase wages for the miners, many of whom had families struggling to survive on starvation wages. The knock on his office door interrupted Caleb's morning review of the ranch's cattle breeding program. "Come in," he called, looking up to see Sheriff William Crawford entering with a satisfied expression that suggested good news. "Morning, Caleb," the sheriff said, settling into the chair across from the desk. "I thought you'd want to know that the Territorial Attorney General has completed his investigation into Mayor Blackstone's business dealings." Caleb set down the papers he had been reading and gave Crawford his full attention. The investigation had been launched after Caleb's lawyers discovered irregularities in several city contracts that suggested corruption and embezzlement on a massive scale. What did they find? Crawford smiled grimly. Enough evidence to send Blackstone to territorial prison for at least 10 years. Turns out he's been taking kickbacks from contractors, embezzling tax money, and selling city property to his friends for far below market value. The man's been treating the town treasury like his personal bank account. The news brought Caleb a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. What about the others? Judge Whitmore is facing federal charges for taking bribes to fix court cases. Banker Morrison has been removed from his position pending investigation into questionable loans he made to his associates using other people's money. And Ashford's cattle operations are being audited for tax evasion. Caleb nodded thoughtfully. The investigation had uncovered a web of corruption that extended far beyond what anyone had suspected, validating Marcus Whitfield's decision to bypass the town's established leadership in favor of someone who had never been part of their network of mutual benefit and protection. "There's something else," Crawford continued. "The territorial governor wants to appoint you as interim mayor until proper elections can be held. He believes you're the only person in town with enough integrity and resources to clean up the mess Blackstone left behind." The suggestion caught Caleb by surprise. At 19 years old, he would be the youngest mayor in territorial history, responsible for governing a community that had mocked and dismissed him just months earlier. "Do you think I'm ready for that kind of responsibility?" Crawford's weathered face showed genuine respect as he considered the question. "Son, I've been watching you for 4 years now, and I've seen you handle everything from difficult horses to complex business decisions with more wisdom than men twice your age. If Marcus Whitfield trusted you with his fortune, I trust you with our town." The conversation was interrupted by another knock on the door, and Caleb was surprised to see Jacob Henderson, his former employer at the livery stable. The old man looked nervous but determined as he approached the desk. "Caleb, I hope you don't mind the interruption. I wanted to talk to you about something important." "Of course. Mr. Henderson, please sit down." Caleb gestured to another chair, his voice carrying genuine warmth for the man who had given him his first chance in life. Henderson settled into the chair with obvious discomfort. clearly struggling with the changed dynamic between himself and his former employee. "I've been thinking about what you said a few months back, about expanding the stable business. I know you don't need the work anymore, but I was wondering if you might still be interested in that partnership we never got to discuss." Caleb smiled at the irony of the situation. The business proposal that had been mocked in Murphy's saloon was now being offered by the very man who had originally employed him as a stable hand. "Actually, Mr. Henderson, I've been hoping you would bring this up. I'd like to propose something even better than a partnership." The old man's eyes widened with curiosity and hope. "I want to give you the deed to that abandoned lot next to your stable, along with enough money to build the finest livestock facility in the territory. The only condition is that you name me as a silent partner and promise to hire young people who need a chance to prove themselves." Henderson's eyes filled with tears as he realized what Caleb was offering. "Son, I don't know what to say. That's more generosity than I deserve." "It's exactly what you deserve," Caleb replied firmly. "You gave me a chance when no one else would, and you treated me with dignity when the rest of the town saw me as nothing more than a charity case. This is just me returning the favor." As Henderson left the office, with tears of gratitude streaming down his weathered cheeks, Sheriff Crawford observed the interaction with obvious approval. "You're going to make a fine mayor, Caleb. This town needs someone who remembers what it's like to struggle." The afternoon brought another visitor that Caleb had been expecting. Attorney Thornton, carrying a thick portfolio of legal documents that represented the final settlement of Marcus Whitfield's estate. "Everything has been transferred according to Mr. Whitfield's wishes," Thornton reported. "You now have complete control of assets worth approximately $400,000, making you one of the wealthiest individuals in Colorado Territory." The figure still seemed impossible to Caleb, who could remember saving every penny to accumulate his $47. "Have you found any indication of why Mr. Whitfield chose me specifically?" Thornton smiled and produced a sealed letter from his portfolio. "This was to be given to you only after the estate was fully settled." Caleb opened the letter with trembling hands and read the final message from the man who had changed his life. "Young man, by the time you read this, you will have learned that wealth and power are tools, not destinations. I chose you because I observed that you possess the rarest of qualities, the ability to remain decent despite suffering, to work hard without bitterness, and to treat all people with dignity regardless of their station in life. Use what I have given you to prove that character matters more than circumstances of birth. The men who mocked you in Murphy's saloon represent everything that is wrong with our society, while you represent everything that could be right with it. Make me proud and make them sorry they underestimated you." As evening approached and Caleb prepared to leave his office, he walked slowly through the streets of Copper Creek, noting how much had changed since that humiliating day in Murphy's saloon. The construction of new businesses funded by his investments had created jobs for dozens of families. The improved wages at his mine had lifted the entire community's standard of living. Most importantly, the corruption that had plagued local government was being systematically exposed and eliminated. The stable boy who had been mocked for dreaming beyond his station had proven that dreams backed by determination and integrity could overcome any obstacle. More than that, he had demonstrated that true leadership came not from inherited privilege, but from earned respect and genuine concern for others. As Caleb reached the steps of Murphy's saloon, he paused for a moment, remembering the pain and humiliation he had felt in that room just a few months earlier. Now, as the town's wealthiest citizen and soon-to-be mayor, he could have taken revenge on the men who had treated him so cruelly. Instead, he had chosen justice over vengeance, using his power to improve conditions for everyone, rather than to punish his former tormentors. That choice, more than any amount of wealth or status, represented the true measure of the man he had become. What an incredible transformation from stable boy to mayor. Caleb proved that character and determination matter more than birth or circumstances. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for more amazing tales of triumph over adversity in the Old West. Share this inspiring story with anyone who believes that hard work and integrity can overcome any obstacle. What was your favorite moment of Caleb's journey? Let us know in the comments below.